Squeeze drummer Gilson Lavis dead at 74. The final footage. The rain fell lightly on the quiet streets of Bedford that morning, turning the asphalt slick and reflective under the pale light. Inside a small house, familiar and unassuming, a life quietly slipped away. David Lesley Gilson Lavis, known to the world as the rhythmic heartbeat behind Squeeze's greatest hits, had passed at 74. For decades, his drums told stories that words alone could not. Stories of love, heartbreak, clever mischief, and the pulse of life itself. Yet behind that public rhythm lay a human story of struggle, resilience, and reinvention. Friends and family remember a man whose humor could light a room and whose creativity transcended the drum kit, touching canvas as deftly as snare and cymbal. This is more than an obituary. This is the story of a man whose life intersected with music legends, whose percussion shaped a generation of British pop, and whose battles with personal demons were waged quietly, with honesty and courage. It's a journey through triumph and trial, a reflection on artistry, humanity, and the fragility of life. Tonight, we honor him not just as a drummer, but as a human being whose legacy resonates far beyond his notes. David Lesley Lavis was born on the 27th of June, 1951, in the modest town of Bedford, England. Life in post-war Britain was shaped by resilience, by communities learning to rebuild from the rubble of history. David's upbringing was far from the gilded world of rock stardom. His family had no ties to music industries, no backstage passes to offer. The young David began his journey not on a stage, but in the grit and grind of everyday work, laboring, learning discipline, and understanding the value of effort. Yet music called to him. He found rhythms in the mundane, the clatter of tools, the cadence of footsteps, the rhythm in the heartbeats of life itself. By his mid-teens, that calling had become his path. He began performing professionally, learning fast under the tutelage of touring legends. On the road with Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Dolly Parton, David absorbed not just skill, but the realities of a musician's life, the exhaustion, the exhilaration, the delicate dance between creativity and commerce. He was not only learning technique, but also the psychology of performance, the art of reading a room, the intuition of timing, and the patience to wait for the right moment. These years laid the foundation for what would become his signature style, inventive, sensitive, and deeply supportive of the song rather than the ego. In the early hours, the house was calm. The familiar hum of life, soft footsteps, the faint tick of a clock, the distant murmur of traffic, filled the spaces that had once been alive with creativity. Inside, David's presence lingered like an echo, in the instruments carefully arranged, in paintbrushes standing ready beside unfinished portraits, in stacks of sheet music that bore the fingerprints of a lifetime spent in rhythm. When those closest to him discovered that he had passed, the shock was not just in the fact of death, but in the sudden visceral awareness of absence. It's one thing to know someone struggles with the quiet battles of life, illness, age, personal demons, but it is another to feel their heartbeat, their presence, simply disappear. The house became a stage for grief, a family navigating disbelief, a community grappling with the loss of someone who had been larger than life in both sound and spirit. It was in these moments that the duality of his existence became most apparent. The celebrated drummer whose beats became the soundtrack to countless lives, and the man who had faced personal battles with courage and candor, even when the world did not watch. The discovery of his passing was less a shock than a solemn realization of the void he left behind. The silence where rhythm once resided, the stillness where music had always thrived. And yet, amid sorrow, there was a strange serenity. David Leavis had lived on his own terms through music, through art, and through moments of honesty about life's challenges. He had retired only the year before, in 2024, marking the conclusion of a career that had spanned decades. In death, as in life, he left a legacy that spoke not just through the sound of drums or the strokes of a brush, but through the human connection that his artistry forged. Even as the news spread and tributes poured in, a profound sense of intimacy remained. A family grieving, a band mourning a member, a city reflecting on one of its most inventive sons. In the discovery of his death, the world paused not in shock alone, but in recognition of a life marked by creativity, struggle, and resilience. The rhythm may have stopped, but its echoes would continue to resonate in every note he had ever played. When a life as public and impactful as David Levis's comes to an end, the investigation that follows is less about suspicion and more about understanding the human, medical, and emotional contours of a life concluded. In the early hours following his passing, investigators, family, and friends sought clarity. They approached the scene with the same care a historian might approach a priceless manuscript, aware that each detail, however small, would help shape the narrative of a man whose rhythm had guided a generation. This period of reflection gained a public dimension through carefully chosen interviews and candid discussions. By sharing the realities of his struggles with alcoholism, David offered a gift of insight to the wider world, a reminder that even those whose talents seem effortless often battle unseen challenges. In one 2015 interview, his words were stark, yet tender. "I didn't know if I could be in the music business and stay sober." That admission was a moment of cinematic honesty, a confession that echoed far beyond his personal sphere, touching fans, fellow musicians, and anyone who had wrestled with their own demons. Simultaneously, the confrontation extended to the broader narrative of his life's work. The band, the albums, the iconic hits, they were no longer just commercial milestones. For his family, the aftermath was intensely personal. They navigated grief with a mix of sorrow and gratitude, mourning not just the man himself but the experiences he could no longer share. His children, nephews, nieces, and close relatives spoke of a man whose life had been defined by dedication, creativity, and kindness. There was sorrow in the thought of the milestones he would never witness, but there was also comfort in knowing that he had lived fully, unafraid to confront his struggles and embrace his passions. Family stories poured into memorials, interviews, and social media tributes, small snapshots of a life that had been both extraordinary and deeply human. The music world responded with a blend of reverence and reflection. Fellow musicians shared memories of tours, recording sessions, and late-night jam sessions where Leavis's drumming elevated every song. Jules Holland, with whom David had spent years performing in the Rhythm and Blues Orchestra, spoke of him not merely as a drummer, but as a creative force whose curiosity and generosity left an indelible mark on everyone he met. Interviews, documentaries, and tribute performances captured the essence of his artistry. Meticulous, inventive, and deeply empathetic to the music itself. Fans, too, were moved. Across the globe, social media platforms lit up with messages of gratitude, remembrance, and reflection. Stories poured in from people who had been inspired not just by his music, but by the candid way he spoke about his struggles, his pursuit of artistry, and his relentless drive to evolve. "He wasn't just a drummer," wrote one fan. "He was a storyteller with sticks in his hands, and his honesty made us feel seen too." It became clear that the impact of his life extended far beyond the hits he played into hearts, into personal journeys, and into the ways people related to their own creativity and vulnerability. The aftermath also revealed the broader cultural significance of his work. Music historians and journalists revisited Squeeze's catalog with renewed interest, analyzing the rhythmic complexity and subtle textures that Leavis had brought to each track. The percussion on Goodbye Girl, once just a fascinating anecdote, was now studied as a masterclass in sonic storytelling. His inventive techniques, blending unconventional instruments and layered tracks, were celebrated not just for technical ingenuity, but for emotional resonance. How a song could feel lived in, intimate, and human because of his touch. Art, too, became a central focus. David's portraiture, which had quietly flourished alongside his music career, found renewed appreciation. Exhibitions that had once drawn niche audiences now gained broader recognition. Paintings of Paul McCartney, Eric Clapton, and other musicians revealed the depth of his observation, his ability to capture personality, vulnerability, and expression on canvas. Critics remarked that the same precision, empathy, and sensitivity he brought to drums were present in his art. Each brushstroke a reflection of rhythm, attention, and human understanding. Yet the aftermath was not only about celebration, it was also about reflection on the challenges he faced. Conversations about his struggles with alcoholism, the pressures of touring, and the emotional toll of a life in the spotlight became part of the broader narrative. His honesty in addressing these issues, particularly in later interviews, allowed fans and fellow musicians to confront difficult topics with empathy rather than judgment. In this way, the aftermath became a testament to the human dimension of fame, creativity, and vulnerability, a reminder that even those we admire are profoundly human. Through it all, the community of those who knew him best, family, friends, and collaborators found ways to honor his legacy. Memorial concerts, special radio segments, and online tributes kept his music alive, not as nostalgia, but as a living, breathing part of contemporary culture. Each drumbeat, each painting, each recollection became a note in the ongoing symphony of remembrance. And while the grief was palpable, it was tempered with the enduring joy that came from knowing his life had touched so many in so many different ways. In the quiet moments that followed, it became clear. The aftermath of David Levis's life was not defined by absence alone, but by resonance. Every note he played, every canvas he painted, and every candid reflection he shared created ripples that continue to move outward, touching people who may never have met him in person but who now carry a piece of his humanity with them. His rhythm lingers in the ears of music lovers, in the brushstrokes of his art, and in the hearts of those who were fortunate enough to witness the depth of his life. In truth, The Aftermath is a narrative of love, gratitude, and remembrance, a cinematic final act in a story that refuses to fade. Even in death, David Levis's influence is vivid, immediate, and profoundly moving. His life's echoes remind us that legacy is not measured only in fame or accolades, but in the subtle, enduring ways we touch the lives of others. As the dust settles on the story of David Gilson Lavis, we are left not with empty silence, but with a profound sense of reflection. A moment to pause, to feel, and to consider the fragility and brilliance of a life lived fully. His story, like the subtle, inventive rhythms he created on his drum kit, is layered, textured, and emotionally resonant. It reminds us that the measure of a life is not just in the songs we hear or the art we see, but in the quiet courage, the resilience, and the creativity that shape every choice, every relationship, and every contribution. Gilson's journey was one of contrasts. From humble beginnings in Bedford, England, to stages shared with musical legends. From the triumphs of international fame with Squeeze, to the private struggles with health and addiction. Yet through it all, there was a singular, unwavering thread, his commitment to authenticity. Whether pounding out a complex rhythm on stage, experimenting with unconventional percussion, or capturing the essence of a fellow musician in paint, he approached life with a meticulous eye and an empathetic heart. His work demanded attention, patience, and reflection, the same qualities he showed in navigating life's uncertainties. Reflection is inevitable when considering his story. We see the joy he brought to audiences through iconic songs like Cool for Cats and Up the Junction, and we feel the heartbreak of a life cut short by time. We witness the struggles he faced, pressure, addiction, and the demands of fame. Yet we also see his courage in confronting those challenges, seeking sobriety, and continuing to create. His journey serves as a reminder that even the most talented, the most seemingly untouchable among us, face personal battles that remain unseen. And yet there is dignity, artistry, and humanity in facing them head-on. His story also invites us to consider legacy. Legacy is not merely the sum of accomplishments, but the way a life touches others, the inspiration it sparks, and the empathy it fosters. Gilson Lavis leaves behind more than drum tracks or paintings. He leaves a model of honesty, creativity, and resilience. He showed that success is not without struggle, that art is not only performance but reflection, and that human connection through music, through art, through words, is the most lasting rhythm of all. In telling his story, we are reminded of the power of remembrance. We honor him not by dwelling on what was lost, but by celebrating what he gave: music that continues to move generations, art that captures the soul, and a life lived with unflinching honesty. These reflections bring us closer to understanding the humanity behind the headlines, the vulnerability behind the applause, and the person behind the persona. Here on the final footage, this is why we tell these stories, not only to chronicle events, but to illuminate lives, struggles, and the complex human experiences that shape them. Like the rhythms of Levis's drumming, each story carries subtle layers: tension, resolution, heartbreak, and triumph. We invite you to listen closely, to feel the cadence, and to reflect not just on the events, but on the people whose lives are intertwined with them. True crime, like music or art, is not merely about the shocking or sensational. It is about the emotional and psychological truths that bind us all. If you've followed this story, take a moment to honor it. Listen to a favorite Squeeze track, watch a live performance, or explore one of Levis's paintings. Let it remind you of the enduring impact one life can have. And as you do, remember that empathy and reflection are always part of the story, both the stories we tell and the ones that touch our hearts. We invite you to continue this journey with us. The final footage is more than a channel. It is a space to explore the human side of mysteries, to confront emotion, to understand the psychology behind actions, and to honor those affected. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and join a community that seeks truth with care, curiosity, and respect. Share stories that resonate, comment with reflections, and immerse yourself in the narratives that shape our world, not as spectators, but as empathetic witnesses. Every story we tell is a tribute to lives lived, lessons learned, and truths uncovered. Just as Gilson Lavis's drumming reverberated far beyond the stage, the echoes of human experience, courage, and creativity resonate beyond the story itself. Let his legacy inspire reflection, empathy, and a deeper appreciation for the intricate rhythms of life, both ordinary and extraordinary. His story ends here, yet its impact is ongoing just as music, art, and memory persist beyond the final note, beyond the final stroke of paint. We remember, we honor, and we carry forward the lessons embedded in the life of David Gilson Lavis.